Hello and welcome to the 29th video in this series, making simple Flappy Robin for Android using Cocos2dx. So a couple of things before I start the video. There are builders above again, woohoo, in the flat, so if there are knocking and grinding and drilling sounds, you'll know what's the reason is behind that. I explained there was a delay from the previous videos because I was away with work. Well, whilst being away I seem to have picked up some kind of bug, so I apologise if I sound a little bit under the weather or anything, but that's the reason. So then, where are we? Well, there's a sort of an interim release on the Play Store of the app with the gameplay that you've seen in this series. The only thing missing are the seeds, but we'll cover that later on. And now I want to look at how we save and load the settings, and we'll start doing that with saving and loading the effects and music volume. Now I won't do all this all in one video, we'll do it in 3 stages so it's all clear, 3 short stages. The way we're going to handle this is using our game manager. You'll remember inside the settings scene, every time we increment the effect or the music volume, we then call a function, these functions set music and set effects volume, inside the game manager. And I've just realised these two should be back in here. I didn't put those back in after the preparation earlier. And what we can do then is, because the game manager keeps hold of throughout the application's life the music and effects volume, we can, when the app first starts up, load these settings into the game manager, and when the app closes down, then save those settings to disk. And the way we'll do the saving of the settings, or where we'll save them, is we'll do it via the Android code layer rather than the C++. Now Cocos2dx provides already in its framework the ability to save settings to disk and covers that all for you. However, I prefer to do it inside the Java layer, the reason being that when the app becomes a lot bigger, I find that there's a lot of stuff that's much easier to do in the Java, so the submitting of scores to the Game Center, achievements, using an SQLite database for multi-users and scores and all sorts of things like that, I find all easier to do in Java, because the APIs are pretty good for that stuff, and I like to have all the settings and things then in one place, so using the Java layer seems sensible. And now that we've seen how you use the JNI to go between the C++ and the Java, you understand already that's not much of a problem. So I'll stop wittering on and we'll make a start in this video using the game manager then to deal with these settings. So the first thing I want to do is, inside game manager, is make a couple of void functions, save settings to disk, and then the other one will be load settings from disk. And then just save the file and copy these functions and drop them into the C file or the C++ file. And I can already hear grinding and drilling sounds aplenty. I wonder if you can. Okay, and we want the C game manager here. Okay then, up inside the late init, I just pasted back in because I'd forgotten to remove them in the prep, but we have the volume set to 5 here. We're just going to cut that out and drop down into the load settings and load them up in here. So now we need to think about where we're going to load and save our settings. The first place we need to go is into the app delegate, and the app delegate has 2 functions: application did enter background and will enter foreground. Now, the thing to note is these functions are called when the app goes inactive. So if there's a phone call or something else that causes the app to go into the background, or you just press the button on your phone and it closes the app, this did enter background will be called. The enter foreground is called when the app has already been active, has gone into the background, and is then recalled again to the front of the screen. So this isn't called when we enter background, isn't called when we then press the exit on the main screen. And likewise, if you've had force stop or you've exited the app, this enter foreground won't be called either when the app is first started. The app has to have already been sleeping in the background for this to be called, and the app here has to simply go into the background either by pressing the button on the phone control or a phone call or something like that. So that means that we have to think about where we want to save and load our settings. So thinking of the loading of the settings then, I'll take our C game manager and our instance, and obviously here when we come back into the foreground, we'll load our settings from disk. But the other place we need to do this then is when the app first starts from cold. So inside our late initialization, just under here, we'll put in the load settings from disk. And now inside the app delegate, we're going to, I'll just take this line here, copy and paste. When it enters the background, now we want to save our settings to disk. And what have I done there? I've hit multiple short keys at once. Because we're going into the background. Basically, every time we go into the background or close the app, we'll save our settings. But the other thing we need to do is when we press exit, we also need to save settings to disk, like so. So in this way, the settings will be saved. Now, the only circumstance they won't be saved now, but I'm not going to deal with, is if the user, whilst the app is running, goes into the settings and then forces a stop. And there's always a warning that pops up anyway from Android saying, be careful, you might lose any unsaved settings. So this now sets up the saving for our settings to disk and everything. And the last thing I want to do is go back into these two functions at the bottom here and just put a log in, just to verify that the functions are being called when we want them to be called. And what I'll do is I'll run the app through, and you'll just see the terminal in this case rather than seeing the whole app itself, because there's nothing really to see. Okay then, so what I'm going to do now is export this package, fade the video, and then be back with the console. Okay, so the application's installed. I just want to find the application now, and you should have the console up in front of you. And now if I just run the application, and we can see that the first startup here is already called. I'll just expand that a little bit. The load settings from disk here. And now if I press exit, you'll see that we've got exit pressed and we're saving our settings to disk. Now if I just load up the application again, and now what I'm going to do is actually send the application into the background here. And you can see again, as soon as we've gone into the background, also our settings have been saved to disk. And if I now load from the foreground, because remember the app's just been minimized in the background, again we have the normal load settings from disk. Okay then, so that's it for this video. The next video what we'll do is we'll start setting up we'll write the JNI function, so it'll be quite a short and easy video that'll deal with our setting and getting of our various settings here. So thanks very much for watching. Comments, questions, criticisms welcome as always on YouTube.